Wow, this is the 100th episode of this podcast, and I'm going to do a special edition on the DNA of the Democrats. I'm going to go through all the leading, the dirty, rotten scoundrels from Andrew Jackson, Woodrow Wilson, all the way through Jimmy Carter, Obama, and then the latest scoundrel in the White House. I'm going to show a deep thread of continuity. They haven't changed. I guess in some ways they've gotten worse. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Unbelievable. I'm now at the 100th episode of this podcast. It's been, quite an experience for me. Not entirely what I bargained for. When we first got the idea for it, Debbie's like, well, Dinesh, you can probably whip this off, 30 minutes of preparation and then, speak for an hour, big deal. You've been doing it for years. But no, we found it was, it's something that we put a lot into, both of us do. But what I love about it is it gives me a regular forum, which I've never had. I do the books, the movies, but those are periodic. This way I get to, at a very important time, by the way, in our country, when it seems like the America hangs in the balance. The America I fell in love with when I came here in the late 1970s as an exchange student. I wonder if that America is passing away before our eyes. There couldn't be a kind of more critical time to be engaging with what's going on. And finally, I've got these wide interests. I'll be talking about, the philosopher Hume or the writings of the Christian thinker Anselm. And so I'm able to weave these. I try to bring it all into the podcast, making it, I hope, a learning podcast, but a learning in an enjoyable way, something that really stimulates thought. Now, I'm going to focus here on the Democrats, the DNA of the Democrats. And when we think of DNA, we think about that sort of chemical unit of heredity that passes things from one generation to the next. DNA is, of course, a biological term. Parents pass their DNA on to their children, but their children also resemble their parents in other ways. You learn things from your parents that are passed down. I remember my dad, for example, had these little mannerisms in which he would constantly adjust his glasses. And I notice sometimes when I come up to speak at a podium, I do that too. Now, is that biological, or is it just that I observe my dad doing it? Bottom line of it is I picked it up. And I think we see with the Democratic Party, a party that, some people think the Democratic Party is not the same as it used to be. It's changed dramatically. Reagan thought it had changed. Reagan would say things like, the Democratic Party left me, I didn't leave the party. And of course, the Democratic Party, which started in the late 1820s, it's been a long time. The country has changed. And people think, well, the Democrats must have changed. They can't possibly be the same people that they were then. They used to be, for example, the party of states' rights. Now they're the party of big government. So right there, you see the Democrats are radically different. But no. What I want to show is that while there are differences, there's also continuities. There's a sort of single line, a genetic line, not a biological genetic line, but a cultural genetic line that passes right from Andrew Jackson through Woodrow Wilson, FDR, LBJ, Jimmy Carter, Obama, and now Biden. Recognizable traits. And what are those traits? Well, we see corruption, people benefiting at public expense, racketeering at the public expense. We see gangsterization, the mobilization of the government against political opponents, the unlawful use of power, the Democrats functioning as a kind of mafia. We also see tyranny, and by tyranny I mean centralization of power, and also an effort to trample on liberty, to trample on basic rights, the Democrats are the, you may say, enemies of freedom. So I'm going to make this case by sort of threading through the history of the Democratic Party, necessarily in abbreviated form, but I want to show that, look, no, the parties didn't switch sides. The Democrats haven't become a totally different animal. Yes, they're a donkey in the sense that there's a kind of strain of stupidity that runs through the party, but they're a vicious donkey, a donkey that likes to kick, and the direction in which they like to kick is away from freedom, toward centralization, toward gangsterization, and toward tyranny. When we look at the Democratic Party, we should begin at the beginning. And so the first question we have to ask is, who was the founder of the Democratic Party? Now, by the way, some people think it was Thomas Jefferson, but no, Jefferson's party was actually called the Democratic Republican Party, and it had a completely different trajectory. It sort of went out of business, you may say, in the 1820s. The real founder of the Democratic Party that we know now, is Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson was a slave owner, and in that sense, he symbolized the Democratic Party as the party of slavery. I want to show you a short clip from my movie Hillary's America, which shows Jackson in this characteristic role. Listen.
In addition to stealing the land of the Indians, the Jackson Democrats embraced another theft scheme: slavery. They imprisoned their slaves not on reservations, but on plantations. Jackson owned hundreds of slaves.
Mr. Jackson! Betty here is getting a little uppity about her work.
Please, Mr. Jackson.
50 lashes.
Now, Jackson wasn't just a slave owner. He was a particularly large and vicious slave owner. He had hundreds of slaves. And by the way, American plantations in the 1820s were quite small. A lot of them had 1, 5, maybe 20 slaves. Jackson was also, by the way, a slave trader. Now, here's a telling incident. There was a runaway who took off from Jackson's plantation, and Jackson placed an ad in a local paper offering a $50 reward for the return of the slave. And then here's the key part, quote, "and $10 extra for every 100 lashes any person will give him to the amount of 300. Jackson was okay. I mean, think of it, almost killing a man, 300 lashes, and Jackson is going to give you a bonus if you do that. So we see here the Democratic Party in its ignoble origins symbolized by this. But how did Jackson get the money, become so wealthy? He started out dirt poor. Well, it turns out that he became rich through corruption. Sound familiar? In this sense, Jackson laid the pathway for later dirty, rotten scoundrels, people like Hillary Clinton, and as we'll see, Joe Biden. Now here I'm going to rely on Steve Inskeep's book. It's called Jackson Land, and it lays out the whole Jackson racket in sort of full flower. Basically what happened is Andrew Jackson, and this is, by the way, all before Jackson won the presidency. He won the presidency in 1828. He was reelected in 1832. So most people focus on that and upon the fact that he was so popular with the common man. He's sometimes thought to be like the president of the common man. But I want to show you how he obtained that popularity. He did so in kind of a familiar way. Now, when Jackson was... before he was president, Jackson was sort of a military captain. And he got into his job, if you will, was to take on these Indian, quote, savages. And in Jackson's word, chastise them. This was Jackson's kind of euphemistic term for kill them. But interestingly, as Jackson pushed the American Indians, and this is, by the way, these are all these different tribes in places like Florida, stretching through the American South. We're talking about the Deep South region of Tennessee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Cherokee, the Seminole. Now, what Jackson would do is, as he pushed the Indians further west, supposedly to clear space for white settlers, Jackson himself would realize all this land, which used to be Indian land, would now come up for sale. Well, this is where Jackson got kind of smart. He brought in a group of partners, and what those guys would do is they would go in early and bid on that land. This is kind of beautifully outlined in this book by Steve Inskeep. I'm quoting him now about Jackson. He shaped his real estate investments to complement his official duties and performed his official duties in a way that benefited his real estate interests. So what Jackson would do is, even before he chased the Indians off the land, he would send surveyors in to sort of assess the land. Then he would alert a group of investors, all friends of his, and together they would make a bid to purchase that real estate. So in this way, Jackson accumulated enormous wealth. You know, he's kind of on the $20 bill. He really should be on the $100 bill. Why? Because he accumulated wealth to become a Tennessee plantation magnate and one of the largest slave owners later in the state. So this began this kind of democratic tactic of using your public office. Now, you might say, well, you know, it's very different, Dinesh. Biden was doing it on the international stage. Hillary was renting out her foreign policy abroad. Jackson was doing this at home. But let's remember that the Indians were sort of independent nations. So for Jackson, this actually was foreign policy. This was Jackson carrying out American foreign policy. By the way, this was under the Madison administration, but doing so in a manner that would enrich himself. Now, Jackson is also responsible for vicious massacres of the American Indians, beginning a tradition that we need to talk about, namely, the Democrats do crimes, and then later in their history, they deplore the crimes, but they never blame themselves. They never take responsibility. They always blame the country. America did this. No, they never say it was us. It was the Democratic Party that pulled this off. So here's Jackson at Horseshoe Bend. He's fighting against the Creek Indians. And we now, from his own letters, we get a sense of how he looks upon this. Remember, Jackson has all the force on his side. The Indians are basically in retreat. But nevertheless, Jackson goes, "It was dark before we finished killing them." He estimated that of the 500 corpses, an additional 300 Indians were, quote, buried in their watery grave. Jackson said that his men cut off the noses of the dead Indians to make it easy to count the bodies. And he goes, afterwards, I had a little bit of a regret. He says, I killed a boy who was 5 or 6 years old. Why? Because Jackson says, quote, he would have become an Indian someday. In other words, he would have grown up. I need to kill him now. This is Andrew Jackson. Now, later, Andrew Jackson, you may say, presided over the Trail of Tears. This is the infamous and horrific relocation that is known as the Trail of Tears, in which innumerable Indians died. This was actually carried on under the Van Buren administration after Jackson, but it was very much in the spirit of Andrew Jackson. So, corruption, self-enrichment, the racism, slavery, the destruction of the Indians. You see the ignoble roots of the Democratic Party. And as we'll see in this episode, these traits of exploitation, self-enrichment, corruption continue to this day. Do I look pretty well rested to you? I hope so. The key to it, a comfortable bed, comfortable sheets, and a comfortable pillow. For most of my life, I thought a pillow, well, it's just a pillow. There's nothing special about a pillow, but that's until I discovered Mike Lindell's My Pillow. What he taught me is that a pillow, like a watch or a phone or a car, can be a work of art. These pillows won't go flat. You can wash and dry them as often as you want. They maintain their shape. They're made in the USA. For a limited time, Mike Lindell is offering his premium My Pillows for his lowest price ever. You can get the queen size premium My Pillow for $29.98. It's regularly $69.98, so that's a $40 savings. The king pillows are only $5 more. All the My Pillow products come with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. By the way, deep discounts on all My Pillow products, including the Giza Dream bed sheets, the My Pillow mattress topper, and My Pillow towel sets. Call 800-876-0227 or go to mypillow.com. To get the discount, you must use promo code Dinesh. I now turn to the second major figure in the Democratic Party, Woodrow Wilson. Now, Woodrow Wilson continues the tradition of bigotry, of racism in the Democratic Party. Not slavery, because Wilson is elected in 1912. The Civil War, of course, is a generation behind. But what Wilson does is he expands the reach of racism in the federal government. Here's a clip of Wilson from one of my movies. And this one shows Wilson expanding segregation through the federal government and the Republican activist Ida B. Wells protesting against it. Listen.
Wilson authorized members of his cabinet to reverse and resist integration with blacks. In 1914, Ada B. Wells and a group of black leaders confronted him about his racist, discriminatory policies.
Mr. President.
Gentlemen, Mr. Trotter, and you must be Ida Wells.
Mr. President.
Of course. I understand you have some concerns.
You have fired most of the government's black supervisors. Your department chiefs have assigned black separate workrooms, lunch halls, and toilets.
Segregation is not a humiliation, but a benefit, and ought to be so regarded by you, gentlemen. Oh, I do approve of the segregation being attempted in several departments of the federal government. It is distinctly to the advantage of the colored people themselves.
Yeah, that's from the movie Hillary's America. By the way, it begins with my interview with the historian and civil rights scholar Carol Swain. Now, Wilson not only expanded segregation, but he also revived the Ku Klux Klan. Many people don't know the Klan, which was started in the late 19th century, was shut down by the Republican Party. But Wilson brought it back. He showed a movie in the White House called Birth of a Nation, and that led to a Klan revival nationwide. So here again, you have the progressive Democrat, Wilson, fostering segregation and racism. The Democrats consolidate their reputation as the party of many of the crimes that are the most vicious in American history. The Democratic Party did them. Now, I want to focus on this term progressive because today we have a progressive Democratic Party. But what does progressive mean? Well, it comes from the word progress, but progress in what direction? Well, it turns out that for Wilson, as for Democrats today, it's progress away from the founding. Progress is defined as a repudiation of the principles of the founding, and Wilson was very explicit about this. He was the first president to attack the American founding, and he attacked it in a very interesting way. Now, I'm now reading from Wilson. He's talking about the founders. And what he basically says is that the founders' ideas are outdated. He says the founders basically were Newtonians. They thought of society as a kind of self-running clockwork machine. But, says Wilson, it's not like that. I'm now quoting him. He goes, government is not a machine, but a living thing. It falls not under the theory of the universe, but under the theory of organic life. It is accountable to Darwin, not to Newton. Quote, society is a living organism and must obey the laws of life, not the laws of mechanics. It must develop. So that's what Wilson means by progress. He means sort of evolution. He's appealing to Darwinian evolution. Now, the simple truth is that if you reflect on Wilson's analogy, and by the way, Wilson used to be the president of Princeton. He thought of himself as some kind of major intellectual, staying, au courant or in line with the scientific currents of the time. But the simple truth is that this idea that progressivism is somehow in line with evolution or Darwinism is complete nonsense. And let me try to explain. Think of what Darwinian evolution means. Well, it is basically about creatures struggling to survive in a competitive environment. Some live and others die. The ones that live pass on their adaptive traits to successive generations. That's how species evolve. That's what Darwin means by progress. Now, the key point, and Darwin's very clear about this, is that evolution operates without the need for supervisory planning or design. Order is spontaneously generated through adaptive behavior at the local level in varying competitive environments. So think about this. This sounds exactly like what free markets are. This sounds like how free markets operate. There's no central design. There's local adaptation. Companies that are successful continue. Those that are not successful perish. So the point is that Wilson doesn't even know what he's talking about. This is a characteristic trait of Democrats. They put themselves in their high chair. Well, let me explain it to you. And for Wilson, the key was centralized planning. That's what he means by progress. He means planners sitting in Washington, D.C. that organize society. And idiotically, he thinks that this is somehow related to Darwin. Now, When Wilson first ran for president, he was competing against a socialist, a man named Eugene Debs. And by the way, Eugene Debs is a big hero today for Bernie Sanders. He has a picture of Eugene Debs in his office. And Debs was a socialist in the classic sense. Debs would say, Debs praised the Russian Revolution. He loved the Bolsheviks. I'm actually quoting him here. We will transfer the title. Well, I'll do it in my Bernie Sanders accent, We will transfer the title deeds of the railroads, the telegraph lines, the mines, mills, and great industries to the people in their collective capacity. We shall take possession of all these social utilities in the name of the people. That's Bernie Sanders. This is Dinesh doing Bernie Sanders doing Debs. But the point being that this is too extreme. This is explicit socialism. And so Wilson realized we can do all this, but we need to replace the socialist name with the progressive name. In other words, let's do creeping socialism instead of instant socialism. And in this way, I think Wilson inaugurated the trajectory, the path in which the Democratic Party has continued, the party of introducing socialism bit by bit. It was started in a way by Wilson, continued by FDR and LBJ, and then taken to a completely new level by Obama, and now by Biden. Did you know that 1/3 of Americans regularly suffer from nausea? My wife Debbie, you used to have a horrible time flying.
Do you know how embarrassing it is to throw up on an airplane, on people, or in front of people? I couldn't get to the bag fast enough. I really dreaded flying. That is, until I found this great device that took away my nausea.
That's why I'm really excited about our new partner for that device, Relief Band. It's the #1 FDA-cleared anti-nausea wristband that's been clinically proven to quickly relieve and effectively prevent nausea and vomiting associated with motion sickness, anxiety, migraine, hangover, morning sickness, chemotherapy, and so much more. The product is 100% drug-free, non-drowsy, and provides all-natural relief with 0 side effects for as long as needed. The technology was originally developed over 20 years ago in hospitals to relieve nausea from patients, but now through Relief Band it's available to you. Relief Band stimulates a nerve in the wrist that travels to the part of the brain that controls nausea. Then it blocks the signal your brain is sending to your stomach, telling you that you're sick. Relief Band is the only over-the-counter wearable device that's been used in hospitals and oncology clinics to treat nausea and vomiting.
Hey, it worked for me. I know it can work for you.
Right now, Relief Band has an exclusive offer for my listeners. Go to reliefband.com and use promo code Dinesh. You'll get 20% off plus free shipping and no questions asked 30-day money-back guarantee. So head to reliefband.com, RELIEFBAND, band.com, and use our promo code Dinesh. Now I turn to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, elected in 1932, but he took power in 1933. And this was a guy who was in there right up to, the end of World War II. This is a guy who had a longer tenure than any president in American history. It was after FDR they decided to sort of limit presidents to 2 terms. And FDR was I won't say he was a notorious racist by intention, but he was a notorious racist in the effect of his actions. So he continues the strain of bigotry that began with Andrew Jackson, continued with others, all the way through Wilson, and continued with FDR. Now, a lot of this is suppressed in progressive historiography, which is, lionizes FDR. So if they mention what I'm about to tell you, they tend to minimize it. Number 1, FDR cut deals with racist Democrats in his own party to suppress anti-lynching laws. Number 2, FDR cut similar deals also with racists in the Democratic Party to cut blacks out of New Deal programs. Now, he didn't say blacks, he just said, we're going to exempt categories like domestic service or farm labor from New Deal benefits, knowing that blacks were heavily concentrated in those areas. So, in other words, FDR was willing to work with the worst elements of his own party. He appointed, by the way, Hugo Black, who was a notorious lawyer for the Ku Klux Klan, one of the speakers at regular Klan rallies. FDR put him on the Supreme Court, by the way, knowing full well what his what his background was. And a lot of the things that we talk about today trace back to FDR. I'm going to get to those in a moment, but before I do, I want to show you a telling clip about the fact that FDR, when he came to power in America, there was another guy who came to power in Germany, Hitler. And although, again, this is something that you won't find in the textbooks, you won't find it in Wikipedia, nevertheless, there it is documented in the historical record, a kind of weird affinity between the Nazis over there and the FDR Democrats over here. Listen.
Hitler came to power in 1933. On the other side of the Atlantic, another charismatic leader, FDR, was elected. The two men recognized each other as fellow progressives. Here's what the Nazi newspaper, Völkischer Beobachter, said of the FDR administration. We too, as German National Socialists, are looking toward America. The Nazi paper congratulated FDR for replacing the uninhibited frenzy of market speculation with the adoption of National Socialist strains of thought. Of FDR's New Deal, the Völkischer Beobachter said, "We fear only the possibility that it might fail."
This clip, by the way, is from the movie Death of a Nation. And it's very revealing because it shows that the Nazis understood that A, FDR was on the left, B, they were on the left. They were trying to do sort of the same thing. And so we can look back and see Nazism, communism, and progressivism as sister movements on the left that all developed. They were all collectivist movements, movements of state power that developed around the same time. They had some rivalries, but they were ideologically on the same side of the aisle nevertheless. Now, the key point with FDR is he was the inventor of, you could call it, the modern doctrine of rights. Today, when you hear AOC or Bernie Sanders or Biden, they keep talking about things that people want as rights. There's a right to health care. There's a right to this. There's a right to that. People have a right. And the question becomes, where does this right come from? And I want to say, it certainly doesn't come from the Constitution, which enumerates none of these rights. But I want to say it comes from FDR. FDR, by the way, gave a speech. This was January 11th, 1944. It is sometimes known as a speech outlining, and he called it this, the Second Bill of Rights. So basically, FDR wants to rewrite the Constitution by declaring a second Bill of Rights that's not in the Bill of Rights. And let's look at what these rights are. Quote, he says that every American is entitled to, quote, a useful and remunerative job, a right to a job. Second, the opportunity to, quote, earn enough to provide adequate food, clothing, and recreation, to, quote, a decent home, to, quote, adequate medical care, health care here as a right, to, quote, a good education, to, quote, adequate protection in old age and retirement. He even goes on to say that people have the right to, quote, freedom from fear. Fear itself becomes a threat, and the right to be free from fear is a right. Now, it's important to think for a moment about how antithetical this whole framework, not just the rights themselves, but the underlying philosophy of the rights, is from the American founders. So let's turn to the founding for a moment. When we turn to the Bill of Rights, pretty much every phrase begins like this: Congress shall make no law. So Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of the press. Congress shall make no law restricting free speech. Congress shall make no law restricting freedom of religion, and on it goes. So rights are seen as limitations on the government. By limiting the power of the government, we secure our rights. And the government is seen as the enemy of rights. But notice that for FDR, it's the opposite. Suddenly, government becomes the friend of rights. Government becomes the guarantor of rights. You cannot have these rights without the government. So the philosophy of big government, which would later expand promiscuously. And FDR, by the way, was there first. He couldn't expand it that much, but he thought of it. In fact, he wanted tax rates of up to 100%. He thought above a certain income, take everything that you make. So this was FDR. So the Democrats, you can say in a way, when they're moving in a direction, they are moving toward a vision, a kind of Platonic idea, a utopia that FDR himself envisioned. Think about it. FDR tried to pack the court. Biden now has a commission aimed at, quote, packing the court. So FDR, in a sense, was the tyrant in chief, not in the sense that he realized the vision, but he laid it out. And he was not afraid to go there, and he hated big business. He once said something to the effect in his Madison Square Garden speech. He goes, "Many of you hate me, and I welcome your hatred." So if we're worried about divisive rhetoric, demonizing your opponents, thinking of people who don't agree with you as people who should sort of be run out of the country, tyrannized, harassed by the government, FDR is your man. This was a very bad guy. And anyone who has fond memories of FDR needs to sort of clean those out of your head. Yes, he played a role in America winning World War II, but in retrospect, here was also a guy who was, you almost say, the author of the modern Democratic Party, and of a party that would become systematically wedded to big government and inimical, harmful to personal liberty. Debbie and I have gotten to know Dr. Douglas Howard, who founded the company Balance of Nature.
What a remarkable guy. He convinced us that we're not eating enough fruits and veggies, even though we thought we were.
You don't need to eat the stuff you don't like. Turn to the Balance of Nature solution instead. Can you imagine how you'd feel if you were eating 10 servings of fruits and veggies every single day?
I started first, and now he's doing it too. We started taking 6 daily capsules. That's 3 here and 3 here, and we're set. And they smell really, really good. They smell like fruits and vegetables. We get all the vital nutrients sourced from 31 fruits and veggies every day. I also swear by this fiber and spice. It is really good. It's I do 2 little scoops into water, and I've never been more regular.
Join us and experience the Balance of Nature difference for yourself. For a limited time, all new preferred customers get an additional 35% discount and free shipping on your first Balance of Nature order. Use discount code AMERICA. Call 800-246-8751 or go to balanceofnature.com and use discount code AMERICA. I now turn to my fourth leading figure in the Democratic Party, the fourth dirty, rotten scoundrel, and that's LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Now, Lyndon Johnson assumed the presidency upon the assassination of JFK, John F. Kennedy, and then he was reelected in 1964. Now, the narrative on Johnson from the progressives is, well, it's somewhat comical. The idea is that Johnson, in his old days, he kind of used to be a little bit of a racist. But then he underwent this amazing moral enlightenment, this conversion, this progression of wisdom, kind of like the Democratic Party itself. Yeah, it used to be the party of slavery and segregation, but it then became the party of civil rights, and that's, of course, why LBJ pushed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. All of this, I think, is pure bunkum. So I want to show why LBJ was a racist unto the end. In fact, using the N-word after the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He never changed his stripes, and he had a completely different motive for pushing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Here's a little clip from the movie Hillary's America, which shows LBJ in kind of classic LBJ mode. Listen.
They got something now they never had before. The political pull to back up their uppiness. Now, we got to give them a little something. Just enough to quiet them down, but not enough to make a difference.
Now, here's a guy, by the way, who used to be, at least this has been reported by FBI agent William Brannigan, who was tracking LBJ, used to be in the Ku Klux Klan. And here's a guy, Johnson, who never underwent any great moral conversion. Now, I want to quote, by the way, Johnson's famous 1965 Howard University speech. By the way, this is like a favorite of champions of affirmative action, because they say, oh my gosh, here's this one-time racist now making a kind of moral confession. You'll see there's no moral confession involved. Here's LBJ. You do not take a man who for years has been hobbled by chains, liberate him, bring him to the starting line of a race saying you're free to compete with all the others and still believe that you've been fair. We seek not just freedom of opportunity, not just legal equity, but human ability, not just equality as a right and a theory. but equality as a right and result. So here's LBJ talking about, in a sense, giving blacks racial preferences. Now, why would he do that? Let's start by noting that he talks about, the first line, you don't take a man who for years has been hobbled by chains. And my first point is, who was doing that? Answer, LBJ. LBJ was a part of the so-called Dixiecrat faction of the Democratic Party. He supported these lynchings or the lynching mentality of the Democrats. He supported the segregation laws. He's the one who's been hobbling the blacks. Does he say a word about it? No. He pretends like this was all being done by someone else. And he is the white knight riding in to rescue the blacks from all this hobbling that evidently some other people, not him, but others were doing. Now, point I want to make is this. The Democratic Party, for most of the 20th century, had built its framework, particularly in the South, on white supremacy. That was the glue. That was why we talked about the solid South. The solid South was solid for the Democrats because white supremacy was its unifying principle. But here's the problem. Starting in the 1940s, racism began to decline dramatically. By the way, it began to decline worldwide. That continued through the 1950s. And why did that happen? Not because of the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement wasn't the cause of it. You could almost say the civil rights movement was the consequence of it. But racism declined really because of the collapse of Nazism. When American troops went into the concentration camps, they exposed the gas chambers. People saw what the sort of doctrine of racial supremacy did to the world. They were horrified, and racism took a massive blow, and there's a lot of survey evidence on this. But here's LBJ. He's watching the decline of racism in America and worldwide, and he thinks, what's the future for the Democratic Party? That's basically what made the Democratic Party hold together in the South. And now they couldn't count on all these racists who were evidently becoming less racist. And FDR goes, we need a new constituency. We need votes from someplace else. Where to look? Well, there's kind of only one place to look, the blacks. And now LBJ has a problem. These are the people that we've been exploiting. We've been abusing. I've been using the N-word. We've been kicking these people around. How are we going to get them to vote for us? In some ways, it's a kind of an absurd type of conundrum. And LBJ, the genius of LBJ politically, was to figure out a solution. Now, to understand what that solution is, I'm going to turn to Eugene Debs' great study of slavery. This is widely thought to be the best study of slavery ever published. It's a book called Roll, Jordan, Roll. And in it, Debs quotes interviews with former slaves that were taken, transcribed at the very end of slavery. I want to just read one of them because it's so revealing. This is a slave named Andrew Goodman. He's being interviewed in his 90s. But here's what he says. He goes, I was never cold and hungry when my master lived. And I've been plenty hungry and cold a lot of times since he is gone. He goes, sometimes I think Marse Goodman was the bestest man God ever made in a long time. And then I'm continuing Goodman. The slaves cried when we were told we were free because they don't know where to go. And they's always depended on old Marse to look after them. Wow. So here are slaves basically saying we were better off under slavery. Why? Because somebody took care of us. Somebody looked after us. Now, LBJ knew people like this 100 times better than you and me. I sort of understand the mentality. I sort of sympathize with it, which is you're flung into freedom after slavery. You don't know where to go. This is like the untouchables in India who sort of suddenly their chains are lifted, but what's the life waiting for them? I get it. But LBJ got it too. And his idea was this. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a new type of plantation, the Democratic plantation. And what we're going to do is we're going to offer these blacks a meager living. It has to be meager. Why? Because we have to create dependency. We're going to give them enough to live on, but no more. If we give them too much, they might dust their hands off and walk away from the Democratic Party. So what we're going to say to them is that unlike slavery, they're not going to have to work. In fact, we prefer if they don't work. What we want them to be is dependent on the government. We're going to give an array of poverty programs, race-based programs. Essentially, we're going to give you the same life support system that you had under slavery. We're going to meet the demand of Henry Goodman. Your job is simple. It's no longer to work for us. It is to keep voting for us, to keep us in power so we can continue to give you these benefits. So this is the way that we keep you on the plantation. Your dependency, the dependency of minorities. And by the way, we see here that LBJ is creating a formula not just for the blacks. It would be later the same formula for the American Indians. And now the Democratic Party is trying to do it to the Latinos. They're trying to take each ethnic group and make it, in a sense, a dependent population that can't survive, cannot even think about surviving without sort of the new massa, the new big house. But the new big house is not the big house on the plantation. The new big house is in Washington, D.C. The new massa is named LBJ. So essentially, I think what makes this so wicked is LBJ was making blacks complicit in their own captivity. He was teaching them, in a sense, to love the democratic plantation. He was creating a class of blacks who would become the champions of the plantation, as we see continuing today. That's why FDR pushed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and the civil rights legislation. He realized that that was the necessary formula to create his new democratic plantation. Ever wondered what would happen if you treat your own family finances the way the federal government treats its finances? You'd be out of business. You'd be bankrupt so fast. Right now, there's leftist pressure mounting for student debt forgiveness, stimulus checks, expanded unemployment, a $2 trillion infrastructure plan. The question comes to mind, what's the economic consequences? Who's going to pay for this? Clearly, the Biden administration thinks they're playing with monopoly money. Now, for years, actually decades, I never invested in gold, just the stock market. But now I'm seriously worried about the regime we have in Washington. No sense of fiscal responsibility. Listen, if all your investments are tied to greenbacks, you're sitting on a ticking time bomb. Invest a portion of your savings into gold and silver. Birch Gold Group is who I purchase from and who you can trust to convert an IRA or eligible 401k into an IRA backed by gold and silver. That's right. Through a little-known tax loophole, you can convert your retirement savings that's tied to the stock market into an IRA backed by precious metals. It's your hedge against inflation. Text Dinesh to 484848 for your free information kit on precious metals IRAs or to speak with the Birch Gold representative today. With 10,000 customers, an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau, and countless 5-star reviews, Birch Gold can help you too. Text Dinesh to 484848 and invest in gold before it's too late. I now turn to my next villain, which is Jimmy Carter. This is, by the way, the president I first encountered when I came to America in 1978 as an exchange student. It was I didn't know it to be the end, but it was close to the end of the Carter era. Now, I say villain because, and it may strike some people as odd, because of course Carter was an obvious buffoon. He was a nincompoop. I've sometimes joked that if you had an award for presidential nincompoperie, well, Carter would be first in line. Maybe there's some competition now from Biden. But when you think about Carter and his destructive legacy, somehow nincompoperie does not really do him justice. Here's a guy who is almost at the root of a lot of the chaos that we are dealing with in the world today. Let me just name 3 countries: Afghanistan, Iran, Venezuela. So in Afghanistan, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Why? Because they thought Carter was weak. They thought he would do nothing. And of course, he did nothing. He himself said, "I'm really surprised they did this." Nincompoop. And that started ultimately a series of events in Afghanistan that have reverberated right to the present. Iran. Before Iran, the radical Muslims were around. A Muslim Brotherhood was started, I believe, in the 1920s in Egypt. So there were radical Muslim movements, but the radical Muslims did not have control of a major state. In fact, this whole notion of worldwide jihad, of martyrdom, of go blow yourself up in the name of Islam, that America's the great Satan, all of this was brought onto the international stage by Khomeini. And the Iranian Revolution was a real revolution. Think about it. This was a revolution in 1979. Here we are in 2021. And the Iranian Revolution continues. It's lasted. In fact, it hasn't even lost its original kind of fervor. It's still pushing with this kind of revolutionary thrust around the world. We're still dealing with it. And now we're facing the prospect of a nuclear-tipped Iran. So all of this could have been avoided if it wasn't. All of this could have been avoided if Carter didn't give us this. If he wasn't, in a sense, the architect of this global foreign policy disaster. And then Venezuela. Carter went down to Venezuela in 2004. This was a thoroughly corrupt election being run by Hugo Chavez to consolidate his hold on Venezuela, a hold that he was hoping to become permanent as he was able to make it semi-permanent. And now, of course, the successor, Nicolas Maduro. Rigging elections has now become sort of a course of business, normal life in Venezuela. Liberty is extinguished in that sense in that country. And who certified it? Who said it was okay? Who actually said that the Venezuelans were running sort of one of the most secure elections ever run? Kind of sound familiar. We hear this now. America just had one of the most secure elections ever had. And Carter and his goons from the Carter Center went down to Venezuela, by the way, along with a group of goons associated with George Soros and his open society. And their goal was to go down there and in a sense, keep Chavez in power. Now, Carter's been down to Venezuela multiple times, and his influence there has been thoroughly invidious. So sometimes when I say to Debbie, Carter was a buffoon, she goes, I can't see him just in that light because there's a certain innocence to buffoonery. A buffoon is a guy who sort of slips on a banana peel and falls on his face. But Carter, there's a wickedness. It is a buffoonery laced with malice. This is a very bad guy. Let me talk a little bit about Iran, because what happened in Iran was the Shah of Iran was an ally of America. And Carter, prodded by the left hated the Shah. They kept saying he's a despot. He is Savak, the secret police. You got to get rid of him. So the intellectual framework for Carter's betrayal of the Shah was supplied by the left. Now, of course, the mullahs were agitating in Iran, but the Shah could have crushed them. What happened is that as the mullahs got stronger, the Shah turned to his ally, America, for help. And that's the point where Carter said no. Carter said, I'm not going to help you. You're on your own. The Shah's position then became increasingly desperate. And he turned in desperation, basically, save me, to the United States. And his pleas fell on deaf ears. There was a great kind of yawn of indifference by the Carter people. And the bottom line of it is the Shah collapsed. And who came in? Khomeini. So if you thought the Shah was bad, Khomeini was even worse. In 1 year, the Khomeini revolution killed more people than the Shah had executed during his whole reign of a quarter of a century. And even though many progressives were imprisoned, executed, tortured, very interestingly, the left in this country went dead silent. They never complained about it. It's kind of like when ISIS or Islamic Jihad throws a gay off a building. The left here doesn't say anything because they're sort of like, well, we're kind of allied with those people. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. We're just going to go silent on that one. Why? Because after all, it's gays over there. It's not really gays over here. So the bottom line of it is we begin to see here, even in the case of Khomeini, how the left behaves even when these tyrannical regimes on the left turn against the left itself. Now, by aiding in the Shah's ouster and with Khomeini's consolidation of power, the left and Carter collaborated in giving radical Islam its greatest victory in the modern era, arguably the greatest victory since Muhammad. Thanks in part to Jimmy Carter and the left, the Islamic radicals got what they have been seeking for a long time, and they're now trying to expand. They're trying to expand in America with forces like Ilhan Omar, with the emergence of radical Islam in this country. Once again, we see that at the beginning, at the gateway, at the inauguration of all of this trouble, all of this heartache, all of this danger supplied by nuclear-tipped weapons, stands one grinning peanut farmer, the stupid but also vicious Jimmy Carter. One of the hallmarks of a great product, a great company, and a great entrepreneur is they do one great thing and then another and then another. And Mike Lindell has done it again by introducing his new My Slippers. These slippers, by the way, took him over 2 years to develop. They're designed to wear indoor or outdoor all day long. They're made with MyPillow foam and impact gel to help prevent fatigue. They have this beautiful quality leather suede. For a limited time, Mike Lindell is offering 40% off his new My Slippers. The My Slippers are so comfortable, you're going to want to get some for you and some for the whole family. We actually did. Here's Danielle, by the way, with her moccasins. And of course, Debbie and I just love ours. I got the moccasins. She got the slip-ons. Go to MyPillow.com and use promo code Dinesh. By the way, deep discounts on all the MyPillow products, the Giza Dream bed sheets, the MyPillow mattress topper, the MyPillow towel sets. Call 800-876-0227 or go to MyPillow.com. Make sure to use promo code DINESH, Dinesh. I now turn to the Democratic Party in the 21st century. And I turn, kind of skipping over Bill Clinton, I turn to the key figure, the guy who, at least in the modern sense, gangsterized the Democratic Party, and that is Barack Obama. Now, as you know, I've had my own experiences with Obama, which I'm not going to get into in detail. I do want to just say one little thing, which is that when I was first arrested for the campaign finance violation, I went to a very prominent attorney in New York, Ben Brafman, a Democrat, by the way, and I told him, I said, this is what I did. What's going to happen to me? And he goes, well, nothing. He goes, you did exceed the campaign finance limit. And he goes, to that degree, you broke the law. He goes, but first of all, this is a very common offense. This is a first-time offense. It's not motivated by any kind of corruption, because I told him, I didn't even tell the candidate that I did this. And he said, let me go down there and talk to the people at the Southern District of New York. I'm going to come back to you tomorrow and tell you that you're going to get what's called a deferred prosecution, which is basically a warning. It's not even a misdemeanor. It's something that doesn't stay on your record. It's basically a don't do it again. And the next day, when I met with Ben Brafman, he looked very discombobulated. He had gone there and talked to those guys. And those guys had been talking, by the way, to the Holder Justice Department. This is in the Obama years. And Ben Brafman said to me, something's wrong. And I go, what do you mean? And he said, is someone out to get you? And I said, well, why do you say that? And he goes, well, I mean, you know, some vindictive SOB. And I was like, well, I can't think of one. And I felt kind of like in the scene in Witness where the little boy is asked to identify the villainous cop, and he points his finger and he goes, that's the guy. I felt like that, the little Amish boy in that scene. And I go, yeah, the vindictive SOB you're referring to lives in the White House. And Ben kind of looked at me. And then, of course, we went into it, and he got a little better picture. And as the trial proceeded, he realized that these Democrats in his own party were operating like gangsters. And this is what made Ben so determined to fight them, because he saw the injustice of what was going on. Anyway, we turn to Obama here, and Obama is, when I think of Obama, I'm sort of reminded of the first time I picked up the paperback edition of Hobbes' Leviathan. It's you see a kind of picture there of the state, which is depicted as a single man. And you've got this sort of large man, and the people sort of are little dots that make up his muscles. They make up his flesh. So the king is sort of the not only the head, but he's also the body of the state. And for Hobbes, this is Leviathan. This is the all-powerful state embodied in one man, the king. And I think that's how Obama saw himself. He saw himself as the sort of embodiment of the spirit of the nation. And this was the collective impulse of Obama. But here's the wrinkle on that. He didn't like the nation that he was the embodiment of. He saw the nation, and this was kind of Obama's father's dream, he saw the nation as a thoroughly wicked nation, a nation that had done unprecedented evil in the world. In that sense, Obama believed in American exceptionalism, but he didn't believe America was exceptionally good. He believed America was exceptionally evil. And it was his job, the king's job, you might say, to take his own country down. This was very difficult for Americans to grasp. Here's a scene out of my first film, 2016, Obama's America, which has Obama at that critical juncture at his own father's grave, talking about how, you may say, the spirit of the father, the anti-colonial spirit, the hatred of America and of the West, how that ghost made its way into Obama. Listen.
For a long time, I sat between the two graves and wept. When my tears were finally spent, I felt a calmness wash over me. I felt the circle finally close. I realized that who I was, what I cared about, was no longer just a matter of intellect or obligation. I, Barack Hussein Obama, no longer a construct of words, do solemnly swear. I saw that my life in America, the black life, the white life, the sense of abandonment I'd felt as a boy, the frustration and hope I had witnessed in Chicago, all of it was connected with this small plot of earth an ocean away. Connected by more than the accident of a name or the color of my skin. The pain I felt was my father's pain.
This is really sick stuff. I mean, think of it. Obama's father abandoned him almost at the moment of birth. Why would you want to adopt the dreams of my father, his father, who was, by the way, a one-legged, alcoholic, wife-beating, anti-colonial kook? And yet Obama was like, I want to be like him. And his legacy was thoroughly destructive. Think about his whispering deal with Medvedev, essentially treason. I mean, talk about Russia collusion. Hey, listen, we got to wait till after my election. I can make concessions to you on the on missile defenses and other things, but I can't do it now because I can't tell the American people about it because they may not re-elect me to do these things. Go tell this to Vladimir Putin. This is Obama. I mean, if Republicans had any guts, they would have impeached him right then and there. This is far more culpable than anything by a factor of 100 than Trump did. Or think of the Bergdahl exchange. Okay, you can have 5 seasoned Taliban commanders who are going to go right back into the field to fight against America. And in exchange, we'll take one loser, one deserter, one Democratic voter, Bo Bergdahl. And Obama thought, excellent trade. I'm all for it. Again, these things you cannot make sense of them unless you understand that Obama is trying to weaken America economically, politically, militarily, and so on. Here's a guy who goes around saying, Obama did for 8 years, we've got to abolish nuclear weapons worldwide. Now, Reagan said somewhat of the same thing, but here's the difference. Reagan would never have dreamed of unilateral abolition of nuclear weapons by America. That's what Obama wanted to do. He goes, I'm now quoting him, he goes, as the only nuclear power to have used a nuclear weapon, the United States has a moral responsibility to act. So right here you see America's exceptionally evil. We're the only ones who exploded the weapons. So he goes, we got to go first. We got to get rid of our weapons, knowing full well that China's not going to, Russia's not going to, India's not going to, no one's going to except us. But Obama wanted that result. In the Middle East, when the Arab Spring exploded, Obama was all for it. What did he try to do? All his foreign policy was designed to do is weaken American allies. Gaddafi was sort of an ally. Obama's like, kill him. The Muslim Brotherhood was our deadly enemy. Obama worked hard to install the Muslim Brotherhood in power, to make them the people running Egypt. And in fact, the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, Mohammed Morsi, became for a time the head of Egypt. There was huge pro-democracy demonstrations in Iran. Obama said, I'm not going to help those people. Why? Because Iran is a deadly enemy of America. I want to keep it that way. So here we have the kind of new Democratic Party that is actively working to subvert America's interests at home and abroad. And this is being done. Obama started this. And he started this based on, to some degree, personal predilections. But in some way, those predilections have now metastasized. And you have a Biden administration that's very much in the Obama tradition. How do we know this? Because it's full of Obama people. And Obama, by the way, living in Kalorama, right in Washington, D.C. Very interestingly, Obama didn't move out of Washington kind of the way Bush did. He didn't go back to his ranch in Midland. He didn't go back to Illinois. He stayed in Washington. Why? Because because I think it allows him to maintain his own network, a network that is now in the Biden administration and quite likely is the body of oarsmen who are moving the canoe while Biden sits idly in the middle, staring into the distance and occasionally simply interrupting by saying, "What's going on? Come on, man." And here we are at the present, and we're now going to talk about Mr. Come On Man himself, namely Joe Biden. Now, Biden, to me, is a little bit of an enigmatic figure. He is maybe in a certain kind of senile dotage, but he wasn't always that way. He was actually extremely enterprising in his earlier career. So in some ways you could say that Biden in his life has combined the stupidity of Carter with the duplicity of Obama. He is also combined in the aggression in which he is pushing the leftist agenda. He's combining the ambition of FDR, the cynicism and manipulation of LBJ, and of course the personal corruption of Andrew Jackson. Here's a clip. This is from my latest film, Trump Card, which talks about how Biden has, made off pretty well in the years leading up to his presidency. Listen.
The Bidens have done very well, and Joe Biden's been very sophisticated and shrewd in the way he's done it. He's essentially offshored the corruption, which means he's been in politics, was in politics for more than 40 years, and during that time, his net worth really didn't grow. But what did grow was the net worth of his family members. A politician like Joe Biden, he has to disclose if he has $1,000 in General Electric stock. He has to disclose if he gets a $200 campaign contribution. But if his brother gets a massive government contract, if his son does a massive private equity deal with a foreign government, there's no disclosure requirement.
So notice how these Democrats always find some path to personal enrichment by using their office. Andrew Jackson did it through real estate chicanery. Hillary did it by renting out foreign policy to foreign governments and intercepting aid intended for Haitian famine relief. And Biden has been making deals using his family members as bagmen. Kind of a straight-out mafia operation within, you may say, La Familia Biden. And in a way, even though Biden now kind of seems he's sort of like the Godfather, remember in Godfather 1, after the Godfather is injured, he's kind of in the hospital, he's kind of mumbling and bumbling, and other members of the family have to move in. Similarly with Biden now, except he's not just using his personal family, it's the larger crime family that we can call the Democratic Party that's sort of moved in and taken over for the not entirely all there Biden. By the way, before Biden assumed the presidency, let's look at him. He became a centimillionaire, over $100 million for the Biden family. He had a 12,000 square foot home in McLean, Virginia, with 5 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, marble fireplaces, a gym and sauna, parking for 20 cars. This was in addition to his beach house in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, and in addition to the Biden 7,000 square foot lakeside home in Wilmington, Delaware. So I ask you, and the same question could be asked about the Clintons, how do you go from 0 to $100 million on a government salary? Democrats seem to have figured out how to do that. So it's important to realize when they keep talking about social justice, we're all for the poor, we're motivated by public service. Public service for them is a business. Politics is a business. It's all a way of making money. And now I'm not against making money per se, but my point is when you make money, you need to create value for that money. There are lots of businesses that make a lot of money, but they create enormous value. They make the lives of their customers better. But think about Andrew Jackson's land speculation, or Hillary Clinton's renting of foreign policy, or Biden's international rackets. In what way did they create value for Americans? On the contrary, they were selling out America to foreign interests. I wouldn't go so far as to say that China, quote, owns Biden, but it seems undeniable that China has major leverage over Biden, because every time Biden eats out of a gold spoon or has one of these expensive curios, he's got to go, I got to thank the Chinese for that one. I wouldn't have that one if it wasn't for Xi Jinping and his minions. Now, in the Biden administration, we've seen the Democratic racket, Democratic corruption, Democratic gangsterism, and Democratic tyranny ratchet up. I think these guys feel that they have a narrow window of opportunity, basically between now and the midterm elections of next year, to not only try to ramp it up and do everything they can, but to try to make their advantage permanent, to sort of break the American system itself, the system of checks and balances. And I think in fairness, we'd have to say that this is going beyond what earlier generations tried to do. Yes, of course, FDR, as I mentioned, did try to pack the court. But the Bidens are moving on all fronts, the Biden administration is. So you have the attempt to federalize elections. The Constitution clearly says elections are a matter for the states. The Biden people want to make sure that doesn't happen. The power moves to the federal government, and that would mean a permanent tilt in favor of the Democrats. I mentioned packing the court. They want to eliminate the filibuster. Again, the filibuster is there, not part of the original constitutional design, but it's been there for a long time. Why? To make the Senate a genuinely deliberative body. And the Biden people are like, let's look for a way. If we can just twist the arms of Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin, we could perhaps get rid of the filibuster. Look at the way that the Biden administration is cheering and pushing, along with other Democrats, for digital censorship. Shut up our opposition. Let our opposition be silenced. Throw them off these, even though this is now the new public square, this is the way in which people communicate, let's shut them up. Let's make sure that there are certain topics that they can't talk about, and there are other topics on which they can't say certain things. And then on top of that, let's prosecute our opponents. Let's go after Trump. Let's make sure he doesn't run again, so we take him off the board. I mean, try to look at this. An attempt to remove the leading figure of the opposition party and imprison him so he can't contest the next election. He can't put his name in front of the American people. Notice the Democrats, even though they say we're Democrats, we believe in the people, they don't trust the American people to have the final word on that. But in addition to going after Trump, they want to go after the Trumpsters. That's the point of this whole January 6th business. Let's lock them up. Let's torture them. Let's break them. And they want to break them for the same reason that the gay activists and transsexuals tried to go after and are still trying to go after the Colorado Christian baker. It isn't just about destroying his life. It's about sending a message to everybody that if you try to be like this guy, we're going to destroy your life. So America is now in I think a unique moment in which the gangsterization of the Democratic Party has reached a completely new level. Its tyrannical impulses are more naked. There is more naked collusion by the media. It's very clear we don't have a media in the sense of an independent critical voice. We basically have people who are Look at the reverential tone of these Biden press conferences and the rare times they occur. This is a cheering squad. This is the courtier press. It's not a real press at all. So it seems to me that American democracy, American civil liberties hang in the balance now more than at any time in my lifetime. And that's why I think it is very important that we are not only vigilant, but well-informed. We think of, I try on this podcast to bring creative people forward who are figuring out ways to thwart, block, defeat these democratic stratagems, but also to put out new and creative ideas on our side. We need to be able to articulate a rival agenda to stop not only the Biden people, but this tradition of democratic corruption, gangsterism, and tyranny that has been with us for a long time, but has now reached, you may say, its terrifying zenith. Many years ago, Debbie and I saw a horror film. It's called The Hills Have Eyes, in which these couples are making their way westward when their car breaks down, and they find themselves at a kind of abandoned facility. Turns out to have been some sort of nuclear testing site, and out of that have come this whole group of mutants. I mean, absolute creeps. but very dangerous people whose kind of genetic disorders reflect moral disorders. And in one of the unforgettable scenes, you have this mutant kind of attacking and violating this young girl. And in some senses, to me, the young girl is America, and these mutants are the Democratic Party. That's who they are. That's my point. That's their DNA. They're a bunch of sickos, and they, far from being grateful to live in America, far from enjoying American ladders of opportunity and prosperity and social decency, these people have set their minds to taking America, or that America, down. It's not that they're against America per se. They have their own America, and their America is the America of moral degradation, of the sexualization of children, of the promotion of every sexual deviancy imaginable, of the centralized state, of the racialization of America. Everyone thinks of themselves in terms of identity politics, economic confiscation, censorship, the denial of civil liberties, the turning of Americans into worms, where we basically ultimately have to look to the state for our livelihood. This is Joe Biden's America. But in some ways, it was also Andrew Jackson's America. Andrew Jackson wanted to impose this kind of tyranny on minorities, on small groups of people. If there's been any sort of change or expansion of the Democratic agenda, it's let's turn all of Americans into serfs on a Democratic plantation, and let's call that Democratic plantation America. Now, very bad stuff. We have to fight these guys in every way. And that means creating alternative institutions, reducing our dependence on these people culturally and politically. Now, I have, over the course of the last several years, I started in 2012, made a series of movies that lays out this narrative, but not just what's bad about those guys, but also what we have to offer, making, you may say, the moral case for America. My movie, America, Imagine a World Without Her, lays out this case for a rational patriotism. So what do these movies look like? Well, turns out you're looking at them. Just look behind me. You can pretty much see all the movies. There's oh my God, there's Obama. That was my first film in 2012. 2016, Obama's America. Then 2 years later, in 2014, I made America, Imagine a World Without Her. 2 years later, Hillary's America, which lays out the whole secret history of the Democratic Party. In 2018, Death of a Nation, in which I talked about how the left is sort of the architect of America's destruction, or you may say of American suicide. And then finally, Trump Card. So this is sort of 5 documentaries that sort of all go together. The great thing is that you can get them. They're all out there. And you can watch them. You can get physical DVDs. You can buy them through the normal channels. You can order them and buy them, or video on demand. So you can stream these movies, and they're available in the normal places that you can do that.
Search them.
Sometimes you have to search the movies. So Dinesh D'Souza, and by the way, don't just type America, Imagine a World Without Her, and it'll pop up. It's really, I think if you watch these movies in sequence, almost sort of like a binge watch, you'll find them to be immensely eye-opening, terrifying in certain ways, but I think at the end of the day, also gratifying because the movies, by the way, without exception, end on a positive or inspirational note. They show the way out of all this. And as someone who came to America, wide-eyed, 17 years old, it's very important to me that we have a rescue operation here for America. But this time we're rescuing America not from the Soviets, not even really from the Islamic radicals abroad, not even really from China. Those have all been external enemies of America. But the most dangerous enemy we have now is, to quote the title of one of my earlier books, the enemy at home, the enemy within, the enemy right here in America, an enemy that would do far more damage to America if it could than all our foreign enemies ever could.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and SalemNow.com.